Hello student, I am Professor Devashish Bose, Head, Department of Criminology and Forensic Science, Dr. Hari Singh Gaur Vishwavidyalaya, Sagar, Madhya Pradesh. Today I am going to present a lecture of BA first semester on the unit Schools of Criminology, which has been prepared by Dr. Deepak Gupta, PhD in Criminology and a guest faculty at Department of Criminology and Forensic Science, Dr. Hari Singh Gaur Vishwavidyalaya, Sagar, Madhya Pradesh. So let's start our lecture by taking a look at what we are going to learn in the Schools of Criminology. In the Schools of Criminology, Module 1 will be our introduction, Module 2 Demonological or Pre-Classical School, Module 3 Classical School, Module 4 Neoclassical School, and finally Module 5 will be our conclusion. So my dear students, let's start with our Module 1 Introduction. It has been generally accepted that a systematic study of criminology was first taken up by an Italian scholar. His name was Cesare Bonassana Marchese de Beccaria, who is also known as the founder of modern criminology. His greatest contribution to the science of criminology was that he, for the first time, proceeded with the study of criminals on a scientific basis and reached certain conclusion from which definite methods of handling crime and criminals could be worked out. Thus, the theories of criminology or the schools of criminology are of a later origin. Now, Edward Sutherland pointed out that a school of criminology connotes the system of thought which consists of an integrated theory of causation of crime and of policies of control implied in the theory of causation. Therefore, a school of criminology implies the following three important points. They are: 1. The adherent of each school try to explain the causation of crime and criminal behavior in their own way, relying on the theory propounded by the exponent of that particular school. Next, each school of criminology suggests punishment and preventive measure to suit its ideology. And finally, each of the school represents the social attitude of people towards crime and criminal in a given time. So, in an attempt to find a rational explanation of crime, a large number of theories have been propounded. Various factors such as evil spirit, sin, disease, hereditary, economic maladjustment, etc. have been put forward either singly or together to explain criminality. With the advance of behavioral sciences, monogenetic explanation of human conduct is no longer valid, and the modern trend is to adopt an eclectic view about the genesis of crime. However, some criminologists still tend to lay greater emphasis on physical traits in order to justify exclusive resort to correctional method for the treatment of offender. So with this, we come to the end of Module 1. Module 2 Demonological or Pre-Classical School of Criminology. The Demonological school is the most ancient theory of crime and dates back to pre-scientific age. As it is clear from the very name demonology, I think you are known demon, the word demon. Means Rakshas, some kind of demon. So, according to thinkers belonging to this point of view, the crime is the handiwork of devil. They are godly and satanic forces in the world. The godly forces keeps us away from the crime and helps us to do well, whereas the devilish force distracts a person from the right path and makes him or her to commit crime. The devil, in the form of demon, takes possession of the soul of a man and make him do wrong. Once the devil takes over the man's soul, sense of morality and the fear of God disappears from his breast. He becomes reckless and is unable to foresee the consequences of his action. According to this theory, it is not the man who can be held directly responsible for the criminal action, because he does what he does under the influence of devil. It's not the man is doing, it's the devil who is making him do the act. Therefore, the man can be regarded as a passive agent only. The active agent, namely demon, is a force external to the soul, but which somehow enters the man to take possession of his soul. There was a general belief that man by nature is simple and his actions are controlled by some superpowers. It was generally believed that a man commits crime due to the influence of some external spirit. They considered crime and criminals as an evidence of the fact that the individual was possessed of devil, and the only cure for which was testimony of the effectiveness of the spirit. The period of 17th and 18th century in Europe was dominated by the scholastic of Saint Thomas Aquinas. The dominance of the religion in state activities was the chief characteristic of that time. The concept of divine right of king, advocating supremacy of monarch, was held in great esteem. As scientific knowledge was yet unknown, the concept of crime was rather vague and obscure. The pre-classical considered crime and criminals as an evidence of the fact that the individual was possessed of devil or demon, the only cure for which was testimony of the effectiveness of the spirit. Worship, sacrifices and ordeal by water and fire were usually prescribed to specify the spirit and relieve the victim from its evil influence. Module 3. The Classical School. The Classical School in Criminology is usually a reference to the 18th century work during the Enlightenment by the utilitarian and social contract philosophers like Jeremy Bentham and Cesare Beccaria. Their interest lay in the system of criminal justice and penology, and indirectly through the proposition that man is a calculating animal. In the cause of criminal behavior, Beccaria, the pioneer of modern criminology, expounded his naturalistic theory of criminality by rejecting the omnipotence of evil spirit. He laid greater emphasis on the mental phenomena of the individual and attributed crime to free will of the individual. Thus, he was much influenced by the utilitarian philosophy of his time, which placed reliance on hedonism, namely the pain and pleasure theory. Main reforms advocated by the classical school: the system of law, its mechanism of enforcement and the forms of punishment used in the 18th century were primitive and inconsistent. Judges were not professionally trained, so many of their decisions were unsatisfactory, being the product of incompetency, capriciousness, corruption and political manipulation. The use of torture to extract confession and a wide range of cruel punishment such as whipping, mutilation and public execution at common places were common in those days. A need for legal rationality and fairness was identified and found an audience among the emergent middle class, whose economic interest lays in providing better system for supporting national and international trade. Cesare Beccaria. In 1764, Beccaria published Dei Delitti e Delitti Pene on crimes and punishment, arguing for the need of reforms the criminal justice system by referring not to the harm caused by the victim, but to the harm caused to the society. In this, he posted that the greatest deterrent was the certainty of detection. The move swift and certain the punishment. The more swift and certain the punishment, the more effective it would be. It would also allow a less serious punishment to be effective in if shame and an acknowledgement of wrongdoing was a guaranteed response to society's judgment. Thus, the prevention of crime was achieved through a proportional system that was clear and simple to understand, and if the entire nation united in their own defense, Beccaria proposed the following principle. Law should be used to maintain social contact. Only legislators should create laws. Judges should impose punishment only in accordance with the law. Judges should not interpret the laws. Punishment should be based on the pleasure or pain principle. Punishment should be based on the act, not on the actor. The punishment should be determined by the crime. Punishment should be prompt and effective. The people should be treated equally. This is very, very important. Capital punishment should be abolished. The use of torture to gain confession should be abolished. It is better to prevent crime than to punish them. Jeremy Bentham, a legal scholar and reformer throughout Europe, proclaimed their indebtedness to Beccaria. But none owed more to him than the English legal philosopher Jeremy Bentham. Bentham had long and productive career. He inspired many of his contemporaries as well as criminologists of future generation with the approach to rational crime control. Bentham devoted his life to developing a scientific approach to the making and breaking of laws. Like Beccaria, he was concerned with achieving the greatest happiness of the greatest number. His work was governed by utilitarian principles. Utilitarianism assumes that all human actions are calculated in accordance with their likelihood of bringing happiness, that is, pleasure or unhappiness, pain. People weigh the probabilities of present future pleasures against those of the present and future pains. Bentham proposed a precise pseudo-mathematical formula for this purpose, which he called felicific calculus. According to his reasoning, individuals are human calculators, which I told you in the beginning, human calculators, who out all the factors into an equation in order to decide whether or not a particular crime is worth committing. In this context, the most relevant idea was known as felicitation principle, that is, whatever is done should aim to give the greatest happiness to the largest possible number of people in society. Bentham argued that there had been punishment creep, that is, the severity of punishment had slowly increased so that the death penalty was then imposed for more than 200 offences. It is a case of England. For example, if rape and homicide were both punished by death, then a rapist would be more likely to kill the victim. So, as a witness, to reduce the risk of arrest. You understand? Bentham postulated that man is a calculating animal who will weigh potential gains against the pains likely to be imposed. If the pains outweigh the gains, he will be deterred and the produce maximal social utility. But the concept is problematic because it depends on two crucial assumptions. They are, if deterrence is going to work, the potential offender must always act rationally, whereas much crime is a spontaneous reaction to a situation or opportunity. And if the system graduates a scale of punishment according to the seriousness of the offence, it is assuming that the more serious the harm likely to be caused, the more the criminal has to gain. In this context, Note Bentham proposal for a prison design called the Panopticon, which apart from its surveillance system include the right of the prison manager to use the prisoners as contract labor. You can see the changes. The main tenets of classical school of criminology, why noted below, are man's emergence from the state's religious fanatism involves the application of his reasons as a responsible individual. It is the act of the individual and not his intent which forms the basis of determining criminality within him. In other words, criminologists are concerned with the act of the criminal rather than his intent. Still, they could never think that there could be something like crime causation. The classical writers accepted punishment as a principal method of infliction of pain, humiliation, and disgrace to create fear in a man to control his behavior. The propounders of the school, however, considered prevention of crime more important than the punishment for it. So it is every time, now still it has been followed that prevention is better than punishment. They therefore stressed on the need for a criminal code in France, Germany, and Italy to systemize punishment for forbidden acts. Thus, the real contribution of classical school of criminology lies in the fact that it underlines the need for a well-defined criminal justice system. Bentham pointed out that individualization was to be avoided, keeping in view the pleasure derived by the criminal from the crime and the pain caused to the victim from it. They, however, pleaded for equalization of justice, which means equal punishment for the same offense. The exponents of classical school further believed that the criminal law primarily rests on positive sanctions. They were against the use of arbitrary powers of judges. They also abhorred torture's punishment. With this, we come to the end of Module 3. Module 4, Neoclassical School in Criminology. So, my dear student, the Neoclassical School continues the tradition of the classical school within the framework of right realism. Hence, the utilitarian of Jeremy Bentham's and Cesar Beccaria remains a relevant social philosophy in policy term for using punishment as a deterrent through law enforcement, the courts and imprisonment. The free will theory of classical school did not survive for long. It soon realized that the exponents of classical school faltered in their approach in ignoring the individual differences under certain situations and treating first offenders and the habitual alike on the basis of similarity of act or crime. The neoclassicalists asserted that certain categories of offenders such as minors, idiots, insane or incompetent had to be treated leniently in matters of punishment irrespective of their similarity of criminal act, because these persons were incapable of appreciating the difference between the right and wrong. This tendency of neoclassics to distinguish criminals according to their mental depravity was indeed a progressive state, in as much as it emphasized the need for modifying the classical view. Thus, the contribution of neoclassical thoughts to the science of criminology has its own merit. When crime and recidivism are perceived to be a problem, the first political reaction is to call for increased policing, stiffer penalties, and increased monitoring and surveillance for those released on parole. Intuitive politicians see a correction between the certainty and severity of punishment and the choice whether to commit crime. The practical intention has always been to deter and if that failed, to keep society safer for the longest possible period of time by locking the habitual offenders away in prisons. From the earliest theorists, the arguments were based on morality and social utility, and it was not until comparatively recently that there had been empirical research to determine whether punishment is effective deterrent or not. The main tenets of the Neoclassical school of criminology can be summarized as follows. Neoclassists approached the study of criminology on scientific lines by recognizing that certain exonerating situations or mental disorders deprive a person of his normal capacity to control his conducts. Neoclassists were the first in point of time to bring out a distinction between the first offenders and the recidivists. They supported individualization of offenders, a treatment method which required the punishment to suit the psychopathic circumstances of the accused. The advocates of this school started with the basic assumption that man, acting on reasons and intelligence, is a self-deterring person and therefore is responsible for his conduct. But those lacking normal intelligence or having some mental depravity are irresponsible to their conduct, as they do not possess the capacity of distinguish between good and bad, and therefore should be treated differently from the responsible of offenders. Though the Neoclassists recommended lenient treatment for irresponsible or mentally deprived criminals on account of their incapacity to resist criminal tendency, but they certainly believed that all criminals, whether responsible or irresponsible, must be kept segregated from the society. It is significant to note that distinction between responsibility and irresponsibility, that is, the sanity and insanity of the criminals, are suggested by Neoclassical school of criminology, paved way to subsequent formulation of different correctional institutions such as parole, probation, reformatories, open air camps, etc. in the administration of criminal justice. Neoclassists adopted subjective approach to criminology and concentrated their attention on the conditions under which an individual commits crime. Thus, it would be seen that the main contribution of Neoclassical school of criminology lie in the fact that it came out with certain concessions in the free will theory of classical school and suggested that an individual might commit criminal acts due to certain extenuating circumstances which should be duly taken into consideration at the time of awarding punishment. It may be noted that the origin of jury system in criminal jurisprudence is essentially an outcome of the reaction of Neoclassical approach towards the treatment of offenders. Module 5, Conclusion. My dear student, the Demonological school, Classical school and Neoclassical school are all considered separate from each other. However, some of the characteristics of each are intertwined in the big scheme of things. It's all mixed, all taken from one. The classical school and the Neoclassical school differed in that the classical school held that people had complete free will. The Neoclassical school emphasized that there were many other factors associated with criminality. These two are similar in the fact that criminological theory that are still relevant today were a major part in shaping criminology theory and research today. With all these important information, here we come to the end of today's lecture. My dear student, do keep in mind that what we have discussed today, because it's a very important lecture in criminology. I will be back with more lectures in this series. Till then, this is Professor Bose signing off for now. If you want to learn more and enhance your knowledge, you may log on to our website at www.cec.nic.in for MCQ, quizzes and LOR. Thank you and goodbye.